Hi, everyone. Welcome to another pre-concert video conversation that Johannes and I are having about the concert for Holland Symphony coming up on March 9. Our feature work for that is Haydn's Symphony Number 94, the Surprise Symphony. This concert is a bit of it's like the Haydn is the main course, and then there are a bunch of appetizers. So the first half of the concert is several shorter pieces or pieces with shorter movements. And then after intermission, we'll have the symphony, which isn't a terribly long symphony, but it's longer than all the other works. So we'll sort of go in order talking about the pieces. The first half, many of the pieces are probably not well known to most people. They were not all well known to me. We start off with a couple of short little tone poems by Frederick Delius. Delius was an English composer who actually spent some time living in this country. I was not aware of this. He tried his hand at growing oranges in Florida. There's actually a Delius festival in Florida. Apparently that's why, because he spent some time in Florida. He taught in Virginia for a while, ended up settling in France, inherited a sizable inheritance, and married someone who also had a sizable inheritance, and they were able to purchase a villa in France. And he lived a life there, relatively isolated, composing out in the country on a river. Sounds like he had a beautiful garden. And his style is very much it's a very romantic sound, almost impressionistic, some of his pieces. And I think perhaps these first two pieces could be described in that way. He's really trying to paint a picture to set a tone. So these two short pieces, one is about hearing the first cuckoo in spring. And then the second one is a summer night on the river. So hopefully, I don't know what the weather will be like when we get at the beginning of March, close to the concert, but we'll be dreaming of warmer weather, certainly. And these two short pieces really invite us to just sort of sit back, imagine the scene. They're both with a fairly small orchestra, minimal woodwinds. The clarinet seems to always play the role of the cuckoo, and sure enough, the clarinet is the cuckoo in that first piece. It's very gentle music, very peaceful music. Two delightful short little pieces. They're about 7 minutes put together. So that'll be the opening of our concert. Johannes, why did you choose these two pieces?
Well, when you think of, like, if I would ask, the average sort of audience member, name some English composers, they might say, Edward Elgar or Henry Purcell, or maybe Gustav Holst. But Delius sort of got the short end of the stick, right? Not many people know him. And when you think of Impressionism, you think of French composers, not Delius. But I think what makes these pieces special is Delius's ability to translate sort of the sensory experience of nature into a musical form, right? Very directly, like quoting, like you said, the cuckoo, but also like creating an atmosphere, right? So these two pieces are, charming musical descriptions of nature. So we got flute motifs and clarinet motifs and just this rich palette of orchestral color. A lot of people sort of seem to know that I favor some impressionistic composers of the later Romantic period of Austrian and German heritage, but they were very good at creating sort of these impressionistic landscapes as well. So I'm very interested in color, and it's a good I would say, contrast to Haydn, because Haydn is a little bit more cerebral. There's some charm and wit, but definitely more organized and more structured. And Delius, just sort of has these tone poems that are very descriptive and don't adhere to form. So yeah, I just love them for color. I'm an organist by training, so I think about colors. I think about what stops go well with other stops. So yeah, and these pieces are perhaps his most famous pieces. But he did study in Leipzig, so he had a formal education. He loved Wagner, he loved Greek, especially some of the folk-inspired pieces that Grieg wrote. So Delius tried to find his own voice, and I think he succeeded. So it's just often overlooked and not done enough.
So that'll be the opening of our concert. Then we'll take a turn to something fairly different when we visit the a work by William Grant Still, who was an American composer toward the beginning of the 1900s. Really broke a lot of barriers for Black composers. Born in a very small town in Mississippi, spent some time living in Arkansas, went to school in Ohio, first at Wilberforce and then wound up at Oberlin. Played music, his parents were musical, so was exposed to a lot of music at an early age. Played in a lot of prominent bands in New York City with some of the great names of the big band and jazz circles, and really was an amazing pioneer in terms of bringing together some of that big band sound, spirituals, jazz, and uniting that with music of the concert hall. Broke a lot of barriers. Was the first Black conductor of a major orchestra. We're going to talk about the Rochester Symphony a couple times, but he was the first Black composer to have a major symphony performed by a major symphony orchestra, his Afro-American Symphony with the Rochester Symphony, and really broke a lot of ground. A lot of his music really draws on jazz and spirituals. The piece we're going to play draws on music from Latin America, more specifically Panama. It's a suite of 4 movements, so sort of 4 dances, except some of the dances have multiple dances within each movement. It's a piece for strings, and we actually played this a few years ago during COVID. We had a couple of virtual concerts. That was back before there were vaccines, before the wind players wanted to get together, when we had a bunch of string players, and we took over the study hall in Midtown and really filled the whole room, and we were all distanced and masked, and but played this piece for strings at one of those virtual concerts. So I'm excited to bring it to a concert hall with a live audience when we can sit a little closer together. It's really quite remarkable, I think, the variety that he gets in the string sound. So there's a lot of lyrical music. There are spots where we play repeated notes in a very short percussive style. This is very listenable. It's delightful. It's very charming. The 4 movements of dances, but he pushes the strings a bit in terms of our range, in terms of styles, rhythms, to try to evoke the sounds, the percussive sounds of some of the percussion instruments used in these Panamanian dances.
Yeah, wasn't it in the tambourine where you have to actually drum a little bit or slap your instrument with your right hand? So there's some actual drumming.
Yeah, there's some actual percussive playing on the string instruments, which we don't get to do very often. But we also use our bows in a lot of different styles to try to imitate different percussive sounds. It's a lot of fun to play. It's got some tricky spots, some tricky rhythms that, again, draw on some of those Latin American dances. Lots of fun. William Grant Still is a composer that's really been sort of rediscovered in the past 5 to 10 years, rightfully so. Just some wonderful music.
He was asked once who were his most influential mentors and teachers, and they were George Chadwick and Edgar Varese. And they're very different, right? So George Chadwick sort of has this neo-Americana sort of style that when you hear it, you don't quite know where it is from, and sort of this neo-romanticism that's a little bit like Hanson. And then Edgar Varese is somebody who ended up in computer and electronic music, early computer and electronic music, and sort of like went way out. So it's kind of interesting that Still draws sort of what he learned from them and then creates his own unique style that is really very different from either of these composers.
Yes, definitely. So definitely looking forward to presenting that to all of you. It's a delightful suite of dances. very listenable, very enjoyable, very graceful, charming, lots of fun to play. And then we close out that first half with an oboe concerto by Eugene Goossens. And I have never heard of Eugene Goossens before this, even though I come from a family with an oboist in it. Um, Johannes, how did you and Sarah arrive at this piece?
Sort of when we think about an oboe concerto, I think what people sort of associate is, either the Richard Strauss concerto, which is well known, or the Marcello concerto. But I've asked Sarah, could you think of a piece, that you would want to play that, ask for a smaller orchestra, because we try to keep the classic three concerts sort of with a little bit more chamber atmosphere. And she suggested the Goosens, and I heard the name before, but I had to look it up, and then I just kind of fell in love with it, right? He's not a well-known composer to most. He was actually born 3 years before William Grant Still, right? So it's of the same sort of time period, but of course in London, England. And I think he was the son of sort of a famous violinist. So he took up, violin again, and then also composition at the Royal College of Music. And then his career kind of took off, especially as a conductor. He conducted some prominent orchestras in England, Australia, and the United States, among them the Rochester Philharmonic. And as a conductor, he championed the works of contemporary composers, very much so. And that was also a hallmark of the Rochester Philharmonic, with Howard Hanson there, who founded an institute, of contemporary American composers. So his oboe concerto is different because it's not in three movements like your average concerto, but it's in one movement. And it was premiered in, I think, 1927. And again, so we sort of go back a little bit towards Adelius, right? It sort of has a descriptive, a very expressive musical palette, right? Lush harmonies, there's lyrical melodies, virtuosic passages. There's also a little showcase built in for the soloist. It's a little bit more I wouldn't say avant-garde, but a little bit more forward-looking in terms of harmonies than the Delius. But again, great orchestration, which is important, right? Because the oboe is not a very loud instrument. It has a unique timbre. But so when you write an oboe concerto, you have to write in a way where the forces don't compete too much, right? So similar to a flute concerto or maybe a clarinet concerto, you have to be smart how you do it. A trumpet concerto, is easier because the trumpet will be heard, but delicate orchestration. And it's just a charming piece. So I'm glad that, Sarah suggested this, and this is going to be fun for me to do a new piece that I've never done before.
Yeah, I'd say even though you say it's avant-garde sounding and forward-looking, the language is still fundamentally of the Romantic era. It's
Right.
very listenable. It's delightful. No, he actually had a father and a grandfather who were prominent conductors, musicians in England. He had siblings. He wrote this for his brother, who was an oboist, probably the most famous English oboist, his brother Leon. He had a couple of sisters who were harpists. His family has actually been described as sort of an English musical dynasty. And he was quite well known, and for some reason, his music really fell into obscurity, and it's sort of being rediscovered now.
Well, there is kind of a reason, right? Because there was sort of a scandal, right, that happened in Australia. So
I wasn't gonna mention that, but
yeah, so people should actually look that up because it's sort of fun reading. But yeah, so he came back, a slight disgrace. In modern standards, this would be nothing. But yeah, so
back in the 40s and 50s, it was something.
yeah.
Um, he was one of the people really promoting building a performing arts center in Sydney, Australia, and that became the Sydney Opera House. One other interesting thing about him, during World War II, he reached out to a lot of composers all over the world, encouraging them to write patriotic fanfares. And that's why Copland wrote Fanfare for the Common Man. So there's a little musical trivia for you. I think not everyone responded, but a few of the composers responded, and Copland Copland wrote that because Goossens reached out to him.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't either. Of course, I've never heard of Goossens, so I didn't know any of this. Delightful piece. So then after intermission, we'll turn to the Surprise Symphony. And I think I'll let you talk a little bit about it, but of course everyone knows the Surprise Symphony because of the slow movement, which is that super simple tune. Some people describe it as almost sounding like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. And according to legend, Haydn was tired of people falling asleep in his concerts. Which, I mean, that probably was true. I mean, he spent a lot of time living on the Esterhazy estate, where probably the concerts followed a big meal with lots of food and drink. People probably fell asleep in his concerts. He wrote this in London, where he had just marathon concerts where maybe people fell asleep. Allegedly, he put that big loud chord in there to wake everybody up. I think perhaps that isn't true. I don't know. What do you think, Johannes?
Yeah, I mean, he's also doing that. I mean, right now with my college orchestra, we're working on Mahler 1, First Symphony, the Titan, and going from the third movement into the fourth symphony. I mean, everybody sort of lingers into the soft passage, and then bam, the full brass comes in. So he started the trend. I think a lot of composers then afterwards, did surprises like that. Yeah, I think it's definitely something that conducting students study, right? Because Haydn wrote so many symphonies, but what really is important is his output in the London symphonies, right? So this was completed, I think, in 1791 during a second trip to London. So it's part of a set of the 12 symphonies written for London. And it's really like people don't really know the other movements, they just know the second movement. But it's a fun symphony in all its ways, and even though it sounds like fast and virtuosic, I think it plays well for the violin. I mean, I'm not a violinist, but G major and just knowing Haydn, it plays really well. And it sort of starts, the first movement starts with this majestic introduction, right? And then grand and noble, and then you go into the faster section in the allegro. There are mood shifts and skillful orchestration. There's always sort of an element of dialogue where the musical section, sometimes it's between the cellos and the violin, sometimes it's between the first violin and the second violin. So there's like dialogue happening between each other. So it seems very energetic. And what I like about the second symphony of the second movement is you sort of expect that big surprise to come back. So you just kind of wait for it, and then it doesn't, right? So there's just a forte moment, but that chord that sort of wakes you up, where you feel like this could be happening again, it doesn't. So it just keeps you in this, anticipatory state. And it's nothing major, it's just a sudden fortissimo that comes unexpected. Yeah, and then third movement is a menuetto, marked allegro molto. Conductors do wide differences. Some people do this ultra slow in 3. Some people have more of a 1 feel. So I think we're going to try not to do it too slowly. Minuet and trio, so pretty standard. And then there's a fast fourth movement, allegro di molto. And then orchestral climax. And so what really showcases the symphony is how Haydn sort of standardized orchestral form, right? So you have the usual forces of double woodwinds, and then the standard orchestral form. So huge influence on Mozart and then later Beethoven. So maybe the most conservative piece on this program, but definitely one of the more influential ones.
Yeah, Haydn wrote 104 symphonies. This is 94.
Yeah.
And it's hard to understate the importance he played in developing the structure or the overall 4-movement structure of the symphony. The instruments. As I was saying earlier, he spent a lot of his career working for one particular noble family, the Esterhazy family, and really enjoyed a lot of financial security. They liked him. He could experiment, explore, try lots of things. It's sort of like he had tenure. He had the freedom to explore. That estate really became known for good quality music. They hired better and better players, more players. So Haydn just had this wonderful orchestra at his disposal. Wrote lots and lots of pieces there. So we owe a lot to Haydn, and he does often display a bit of a sense of humor in his works. His quartets, he did the same thing with the quartets. Wrote 68, I think, quartets, and really developed that structure, which is similar to the structure of the symphony. But yeah, it's hard to overstate how much we owe to Haydn in terms of just settling structures and frameworks and
Yeah,
yeah.
there are some parallels to Mozart, right? So Haydn was educated, as a choir boy in St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna, and he learned to sing, but also instrumentalist. So it could have worked that he also could have gone into sacred music full time, right? And with Mozart, it was the same thing, right? In Salzburg, he was doing mainly sacred music. And then he just broke free from the archbishop, and then truly became an instrumental and opera composer. And for Haydn, when he got the job at Esterhazy at age 29, right, and then he stayed there for 30 years. So that really, he wrote what they wanted to hear. And back then, it's symphonies for dinners and entertainment. But he could have easily done oratorio works on sacred music. So it's interesting. He did write some operas. They're not often performed, and oratorios. What's the famous one?
The creation. Yeah.
Creation. Yeah, they're often a little lengthy, but it's where and especially the London symphonies, is where his sparkles, right? So this is where you just feel like they are inspired, these works, right? Most recently, we had done the 104, the London Symphony, and then also, I think, 103, drum roll.
Drum roll.
Yeah, so we try to present, Haydn symphonies every now and then, because they're just really staples of the repertoire, and they are fun to work on, right?
They're fun to play.
Yeah.
So, let me ask you one parting question, Johannes. What piece are you most looking forward to conducting on this concert? It's a lot of very different music.
When people ask me as a conductor, who's my favorite composer, it's just so hard to come up with it. I think I am attracted to this profession because I get to do so much, so many different pieces. When we did the Rite of Spring, I really like the Rite of Spring, and when we do a Haydn symphony, I really like the Haydn symphony. So I think it's the combination and the different challenges that, for example, the Delius will require versus the Haydn. So I do like this as sort of a Gesamtkunstwerk, right? So I enjoy the breadth of repertoire, not one single piece.
Okay, so you're not going to answer my question.
What about you? You just like the Haydn because it feels good?
I'm looking forward to playing the Haydn. I'm looking forward to playing the William Grant Still suite again.
Okay.
That was fun to do in COVID, and looking forward to revisiting that. I enjoy going back to pieces. The first time, it takes a lot of work to figure out how all the different parts fit together, and when I'm able to go back to a piece and play it again, you sort of remember the patterns come back in your fingers, and I think you can explore more, enjoy more of the depth of the piece rather than
just. It's nice, at Holland Symphony, that we can do things like the Beethoven Piano Concerto No. 5 and Holst. So we have like 2 long pieces on the program, one 45 minutes, one in excess of 50 minutes, and then we can also do a program that's a little bit more intimate with smaller forces. And the longest piece is a Haydn. Everything else is like 10 minutes or 7 minutes. So it's nice to just occasionally do a program like that with many different pieces. There's something for everybody.
I will say, though, I have a young student, and if he's still listening, I'm saying hello to him, who has played a little version of the Surprise Symphony theme and got so excited about it that he wanted to come and hear our concert. So I'm looking forward to playing that slow movement, partly for my student. So.
Okay.
So thank you all for listening. We're grateful that you come to our concerts, and you all are such wonderful supporters of Holland Symphony. We look forward to seeing you at the concert. Feel free to find us in the lobby before or afterwards if you have more questions. We'll see you on March 9. Thanks.
Thank you.